Okay, my laptop was about to run out of juice and I had to plug back in, so pardon me for the interruption. So we're talking about groups, and we said that groups are really important in terms of the structure of society, and we are influenced by the norms and values of the groups that we belong to. And if we deviate too far from their expectations, we might be asked to leave the group, right? The expectations associated with many social roles are more clearly defined in the context of a group. If you join a group of people who are single parents, they're going to probably talk about what the expectations are as a parent, as a single parent. And so we kind of start to understand through our interactions with others within groups what behaviors are acceptable or not acceptable in our society. And we see that group solidarity can influence recovery from traumatic events. So if we are a member of a support group, for example, if we're a single parent and we're going to a support group for single parents, we may recover from our divorce or from the loss of a loved one, our spouse. Through illness, we might be able to recover from that more quickly because we have support from other people who've had similar experiences. So groups are terribly, terribly important. And as I said earlier, there are primary and secondary groups. Primary groups are groups that tend to be a little smaller, and they tend to be characterized by more intimate interaction. Okay, so a primary group is defined as a small group characterized by intimate face-to-face association and cooperation. Some examples would include a family, street gangs, fraternities, and sororities. Those are all primary groups. They play a pivotal role in the socialization and development of roles and statuses. And then a secondary group tends to be more formal, and oftentimes they are larger. Not always, but oftentimes they are a more impersonal group in which there's little social intimacy or mutual understanding. So workplace groups and larger social clubs, even the NRA would be a secondary group because it's a large group. You don't know all of the members of the group. You may never even come in contact with other members of the group. And so that's a group that you might belong to, but it's focused on a purpose. Okay, family and some of these primary groups are more focused on meeting people's emotional needs and support and love and companionship and those kinds of things, whereas secondary groups are often more instrumental in their focus. In other words, they're trying to get something done. If you join Normal, you are trying to change marijuana laws. If you join the NRA, you're trying to protect your right to bear arms. If you join Democrats, you have a certain focus that you want to accomplish there. If you join Young Republicans, you have another focus, right? So those would be secondary groups. The groups that are smaller, more intimate, more personal in their interactions are primary groups. The larger, more instrumental groups tend to be what we call secondary groups. So table 5.1 shows you some of the different characteristics of primary and secondary groups. As I said, primary groups tend to be generally fairly small. They interact with each other over a relatively long period of time if you're part of a family. Unless you just leave the family, which is fairly rare, you're going to always have those interactions and associations with other family members. The interactions tend to be more intimate and more face-to-face. There is some emotional depth to the relationships, and they tend to be more cooperative and friendly than secondary groups. Secondary groups, on the other hand, tend to be larger. They can interact on a fairly short duration. You don't have years and years always with a secondary group. For example, if you go into the grocery store and you're asking people where different products are and you're interacting with the cashier, that's a secondary group there because you don't have emotional attachments to any of those people. You're interacting with them on an informal basis to get something done, to fill your grocery basket and get out of there, right? There's little social intimacy or mutual understanding within a secondary group. Relationships are generally fairly superficial, and they tend to be more formal and impersonal than primary groups. We also talk about what we call in-groups and out-groups. And an in-group is any group or category to which people feel that they belong. And then an out-group is any group that you don't feel like you belong to. And so if you're a part of a particular group, you may feel superior to people who are not allowed into the group. You may even pick on and bully the folks who see that as an out group, a group to which they do not belong. And so there's been a lot of research into how people interact with each other based on group membership and in groups and out groups and competing groups and things of that nature. So that's a very interesting area of sociology as well. There are also what we call reference groups, and reference groups are groups that we compare ourselves to and that we aspire to. Okay, so if you're a young athlete, your reference group might be NFL players because you want to achieve the fame and the money and the status of being an NFL player. That might be your reference group if you're an athlete, or if you just want to be the biggest, strongest guy in the gym. You look at these guys over here who are lifting these massive weights and they're getting bigger and stronger. That group of weightlifters, of maybe bodybuilders or weightlifters, if you're talking about power lifters, that might be your reference group. And so you might work really hard trying to achieve what those guys have achieved. If you're a female and you see these female lawyers going to law school and graduating, passing the bar and representing clients or prosecuting people or whatever, and you want to aspire to that as well, that would be your reference group. So a reference group is defined as any group that individuals use as a standard for evaluating themselves and their own behavior. There are two basic purposes of reference groups. They serve a normative function. Now, what are norms? Norms are rules about what's right and wrong, right? So they serve a normative function by setting and enforcing standards of conduct and belief, and they perform a comparison function by serving as a standard against which people can measure themselves and others. So on the one hand, you look at this reference group and you say, well, that's how they carry themselves. That's how they behave. That's how they operate. Those are the things that made them successful. I aspire to that. And so it can kind of set down some rules and some expectations of how you're supposed to behave if you want to be like them and achieve the successes that they've achieved. But it can also give you kind of that measuring stick where you say, well, these folks are really good at math. If we're talking about a scientist, gosh, I really want to be a scientist. I love science, but math is, I'm not sure I'm measuring up there. So I'm going to have to go remediate my math skills and become better and more proficient at math so that I can live up to the expectations of being a scientist. Okay. Sociologists also study coalitions, and these are groups that may work together, or people who work together. It can be a temporary or permanent alliance geared towards a common goal. So you might see people coming together to elect a particular candidate, or you might see people coming together to bring about some kind of change in their community, and they form these coalitions. They may come from different backgrounds, but they think that the change is going to improve the lives of all the groups. So they're willing to come together and work together to form that coalition. Okay, so let's talk about social networks. That's another aspect of social structure. Social networks are defined as a series of social relationships that link a person directly to others and through them indirectly to still more people. So sociologists have done a lot of study on social networks, and we know that networks are really, really important to people's lives. Most of you will have, by the time you're in your 30s or 40s, you will have gotten a job because of someone you knew who let you know about the job and maybe who put in a good word for you. It's always best to have lots of ties in your social networks, even if they're loose ties. If you know some people, if you know a lot of people, you don't really know them all well, but you know a lot of people and they know you and they have favorable impressions of you, that can be tremendously beneficial when it comes to applying for a scholarship or applying for a particular grad school program or applying for a particular job. Knowing people and having a broad social network is extremely important. And most of us have small, intimate networks, and that's okay. But to really be successful in the world, you really benefit from having a large network, social network, even if you don't know all those people well. If they have positive feelings towards you, that can be a tremendous benefit in the long run. We need that intimate, tight group around us for support and all of that. And that's important too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that's not important. That is incredibly important during periods of hardship and during periods of economic downturn, loss of a job, hardship and things of that nature. It's our friends and family that really love us that are going to help us get through those kinds of hardships, right? But having a large, more informal social network that we can call upon. I see people getting on social networking, Facebook, for example, and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a plumber. Does anybody know a plumber?" And they may have 1,000 or 2,000 friends, some of whom have thousands of friends. You can get a lot of information in a very short period of time using that kind of network. I've seen people go on Facebook and say, "I just found out that my job's been eliminated. I need to find employment. Does anybody know of any jobs in a particular field?" And the friends would chime in and say, "Hey, we're hiring right now, or there's a job becoming available next week. Get your application in now. I'll send you the information." And that network of friends, maybe not real close friends, but friends and acquaintances, can be very, very useful in times of trouble and times of need. Okay. So social networks are one of the 5 basic elements of social structure. Research indicates that in person and online, not everyone participates equally in social networks. I'm probably an anomaly in regards to the number of Facebook friends I have. I only have like 105 Facebook friends, I think, something like that. It's a pretty small number. Because I don't just go out and invite everybody to be my friend on Facebook, and I don't accept all the requests that come to me to be Facebook friends. I've kept that group fairly small. Other people, on the other hand, want thousands and thousands and thousands of Facebook friends. They think it's some kind of competition. He who dies with the most Facebook friends wins, right? That seems to be some people's attitude. Of course, I know Facebook is now passe and people have moved on to Instagram and TikTok and other social media applications. But you get the general idea of what I'm saying here. And involvement in a social network is referred to as networking. So when you go to a dinner to meet the president of an organization, president of a bank, because you want a job in that bank, and here's an opportunity to get to meet the president and get to know him and rub elbows with him. That's what we call social networking. And so it can work like that. It can also be a LinkedIn thing. People who are trying to establish a professional persona will establish a LinkedIn profile, and they will then, invite people to join their LinkedIn network who they think might be able to benefit them on down the road. So, it's kind of like Facebook for the business world, LinkedIn. At some point, many of you will have a LinkedIn account or whatever replaces LinkedIn when it becomes passe. You'll have an account there and a profile where you present yourself as a business person, as a professional, and you try to link with other people who are interested in your ideas or your industry or whatever. That can be a very powerful tool, particularly when, as I said, when people start looking for jobs or they start looking for new opportunities. Those big social networks can be very, very useful in that respect. And the next part of social structure that we're going to talk about are social institutions. And I told you earlier that institutions are kind of patterned ways of getting things done in society. So the definition, our textbook definition of social institutions is organized patterns of beliefs and behavior centered on basic social needs. So we need to produce food for our society. So we have farmers out there who are growing crops. Unfortunately, today there aren't as many family farms, but there are what we call corporate farms. Small family farms are going by the wayside, unfortunately. This country is becoming less and less agricultural and more, well, today I guess would be post-industrial, right? And so, the structure for producing food for our population has changed pretty dramatically. 150 years ago, 70% of the population lived in rural areas and 30% lived in cities. Today, 70% lives in cities and 30% lives in more rural settings. So it's kind of flip-flopped in that respect. And so we have a corporate farming entities that produce goods and carry it to factories where it's processed and prepared for delivery to the grocery stores where you and I can go pick it up. That whole food industry is an institution that's set up to meet the needs of feeding our society. As I said, the government is an institution that's set up on making laws and distributing resources to people to determine who gets what and who has power. Okay? So the government preserves order. The family replaces people. We replace ourselves through the family. By that I mean that you get a couple that come together, they're attracted to each other, they decide to get married and have children. That's how society replicates itself. So family is another institution, and it's probably the most important institution, although I would say that most of the institutions are pretty important, but family's probably certainly the most important to individuals. Because having a strong family or a family that's chaotic can have a dramatic impact on the quality of your life and the way you view the world and how you grow up and see relationships going forward. And family, your views of family going forward are influenced by the family in which you grew up. So let's talk a little bit about how the different sociological perspectives view institutions and these other parts of social structure. The functionalists, of course, I said earlier, I mentioned this very briefly, are going to focus on the needs that are met by different social institutions. They're going to say that there are 5 major tasks or functional prerequisites for a social institution. They have to replace personnel. They have to teach new recruits. They have to produce and distribute goods and services. They have to preserve order, or they have to provide and maintain a sense of purpose, or all of those things, right? It might be 1 or 2, or it might be all 5 of those things that social institutions do for society. The conflict approach is going to be somewhat more critical of social institutions. They're going to say that major institutions help to maintain the privileges of the most powerful individuals in a society. So, for example, the economic system is set up with banks the way they are set up to make sure that the people who are powerful and wealthy today will be powerful and wealthy 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Think about it. Government is dominated by people who have power and money. And sometimes those things almost become synonymous, right? If you have enough wealth, then you're able to overcome a lot of other issues. So, for example, I've been reading about Jeffrey Epstein. There's a reporter who got his little black book, and he started calling all of the people in Jeffrey Epstein's little black book and just talking to them about their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And he's found out some pretty disturbing things. Jeffrey Epstein used his massive wealth to skirt the law and to perhaps even to blackmail powerful politicians to make sure that he was not prosecuted for his many crimes. Of course, we know that recently that all came unraveled. It became public knowledge that Jeffrey Epstein had been arrested and gotten what was called a sweetheart deal from the prosecuting attorney, and he didn't serve any real time in prison. And the courts said, "Well, wait a minute, that's not appropriate," and they're throwing that out, and they were going to, arrest him on new crimes and new occurrences, and of course he died in prison. There's still some conflict over whether he committed suicide or whether powerful people made sure that he did not get out of that prison to testify against them. So, a lot of conspiracy theories. I generally try to avoid conspiracy theories, but Jeffrey Epstein had a lot of dirty information on a lot of very powerful people. And there were legitimate reasons why people might have wanted him dead so that he couldn't testify. But anyway, so the conflict perspective is going to point out that wealthy people and powerful people are going to try to maintain the status quo, and they're going to pass laws that allow them to get richer at the expense of other people. So somebody might say that, well, if we look at the tax cuts that were passed by the Republican Party right after President Trump was elected, that most of the benefits of those tax cuts went to corporations and wealthy people, and very little of it actually impacted the lives of working class and middle class people. And they would point to that as an example of trying to maintain the status quo. Social institutions such as education have inherently conservative natures. In other words, they don't really want to change. If you think about our school year, for example, we go to school in the fall and the spring, and then some people take classes in the summer, but historically we've kind of viewed the summer as a time when people would go on vacations and they would take time away from school. They'd work full time and earn some money, to help pay for classes in the fall and spring or whatever. Our public schools are set up where they go to school from August to June, and then July, the rest of June, July, and August, they're out on vacation. And that's all built around the fact that we were an agrarian society or an agricultural society. We needed to be off during the summer to work in the fields and grow crops. There's really no need today to have that kind of academic calendar, and yet here we are into the post-industrial society, and we're still living by that calendar, still operating our schools, our public schools, and even our colleges and universities to some extent. There are summer classes, but there are far fewer students and far fewer classes being offered in the summer than during the long semesters. Okay, so the conflict approach is going to look at how it benefits certain groups in society to have these social institutions set up in the way that they are. And they're going to generally assume that that means that it's set up to benefit certain groups. Okay. The interactionist approach is going to focus more on how social institutions affect individual everyday behavior. They're also going to look at social behavior being conditioned by the roles and statuses that we take on. So they're going to look at how being, if we decide we're going to volunteer in a tutoring program or something, how does that affect us, and how does it affect our interactions with the people around us? So the interactionist approach is always looking at the interactions that people are having with other people and how that's influenced by things like groups that we decide to join and the social structure. How does social structure influence individual interactions? Okay. So those are the 5 elements of social structure. I think that should get you a pretty good start into Chapter 5. I will come back in another video and talk a little bit about organizations. Organizations are really important. We have formal organizations and informal organizations. We have bureaucracies, and we need to know something about those. So like I said, that gets you a pretty good start into Chapter 5, and we'll come back and talk about organizations and bureaucracies and some of those things. But I hope that you're finding these video lectures informative and useful. Keep working hard. We're going to make it through the semester. I know it's not ideal, but the online thing, but we're going to make it through the semester. So just keep working hard. And students have asked me, how can I do better on the exams? I think really intensively reading the chapters and multiple times if you can. I know it's time consuming to read these chapters, but we're not meeting in class, so you actually have about 3 hours a week where we would normally be meeting in class. If you'll spend that 3 hours a week reading and rereading the chapters and highlighting, making note cards, going to Quizlet and practicing on the exams, but there is no substitute for putting in the time, reading. And if you struggle with reading comprehension, that's something that you need to be aware of, and you need to work harder to try to understand what's going on in your textbook. I really recommend that if you have questions about a concept or a relationship or a perspective, try to figure it out from your reading. But then if you can't figure it out after watching the video, after reading the chapter, send me an email. I'll answer your questions. We'll have conversation. Call me on the phone if you need to. Email and text messaging is a great way to have these discussions. And sometimes when you ask me a question, it prompts me to go and do something in the announcements area or in a video to address that question for all the students, because chances are, if I'm not clear about something or the textbook's not clear about something, for one of you, there are good chances that other students were unclear on that topic as well, and I need to kind of clarify some things. So by all means, take advantage of the opportunity to send me emails and text messages, and let's answer what questions you have, because my goal for you is for you to learn as much about sociology as you possibly can, and be able to use that later on down the road to help improve relationships with family members, with coworkers, understanding other people. And, a lot of my students don't become sociology majors, but they can still benefit from learning about sociology. And even those who become sociology majors and take 8 or 10 sociology classes, they may not go into a field that requires a degree in sociology. For example, I've got a friend, former student who is still a friend today, who owns his own business. I've got another former student who is an attorney, and they aren't sociologists, but they use sociology and what they learned in sociology in their everyday careers and in their lives. And it's been very advantageous to them. So I see tremendous value in terms of understanding conflicts and problems in the world, to taking sociology and learning as much about how people interact with each other as possible. You can be a much more diplomatic person if you try to understand where someone's coming from and why they see the world the way they do and why you see the world you do. And is there a way to bridge that gap and come together and form a coalition? So this is all really, really important stuff. I know sometimes it may just seem like it's one of those general studies requirements you have to get out of the way, but this class can have value if you apply yourself and learn as much about sociology as you can. So at that point, I'm now an hour and a half, I think, into the lecture, so I'm going to cut it short for now, but we'll be back to talk about organizations and bureaucracies soon. See you soon. Bye.